An 18-year-old girl flees Saudi Arabia and is granted asylum in Canada. She says she feared abuse at home. What does this reveal about social reform in the kingdom? And will it encourage other women to speak up or get out of the country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. Rahaf Al-Qunun grabbed the world's attention for defying a strict social code in Saudi Arabia. She said she feared for her life if she was returned home. She launched a Twitter campaign from her hotel room in Thailand, pleading for help. The United Nations granted her refugee status and Canada offered her asylum and a new home. Her case may complicate already strained relations with Saudi Arabia. Canada had previously angered Riyadh by calling for the release of women's rights activists from Saudi jails. Mike Hanna has more now from Toronto.
The long and arduous journey from Saudi Arabia over, the 18-year-old steps through the arrival doors accompanied by the Canadian Foreign Minister. The size of the media contingent, a reflection of the massive public interest generated.
Okay, so everyone, this is Rahaf Al-Qunun, a very brave new Canadian. And Rahaf wanted Canadians to see that she's arrived at her new home, but she's had a very long and tiring journey, and so she would prefer not to take questions today. So please respect her. She's a very brave young woman who's been through a lot, and she is now going to go to her new home.
Then Rahaf Al-Qunun stepped back through the doors to begin the first phase of her new life, her wish to go to college and study architecture. The Canadian decision to grant sanctuary is likely to worsen already fractured relations with Saudi Arabia. Back in August, Saudi Arabia severed diplomatic ties following Canadian criticism of the kingdom's human rights policy. Then in October, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi saw an upsurge in demands for Canada to cancel a multi-billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. This deal is now being reviewed. The foreign minister, though, insists that the protection of human rights is more important than diplomatic relations or any trade deal.
UNHCR was looking very urgently for a place where she could find asylum. We were involved in those conversations, as were other countries, and Canada was glad that we were able to act quickly and to offer refuge to a refugee at the request of UNHCR, and to offer refuge to a person whose life was in danger.
It was this message from a hotel room in Thailand that earned Rahaf Al-Qunun sanctuary, the power of social media confirmed, and an example perhaps for others seeking their freedom. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, Toronto.
So before we get into our discussion, let's examine what freedoms women actually have in Saudi Arabia. They can now drive, go to the cinema and watch football, but they still cannot make crucial decisions without the consent of a male guardian. So they can't have a passport, they can't open a bank account or get divorced without the permission of their father, their brother, their uncle or their husband. And they can't mix freely with men. They can be arrested for eating at restaurants that don't have family areas. Most public buildings are segregated. There are also restrictions in sports. When Saudi Arabia sent female athletes to the Olympics for the first time, back in London 2012, they had to be accompanied by a male guardian and cover their hair. And women must wear a full-length black abaya robe in public designed to protect their modesty. All right, let's bring in our guests. I'm pleased to say here in the studio is Noha Abou-el-dahab, a visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Center. From Bologna in Italy, via Skype, is Omaima Al Najjar, a Saudi political refugee who fled the country in 2013. And also via Skype from Canada, Bessma Momani, Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Let's start right here in the studio with Noha. It is an extraordinary story of our times, really, isn't it? It kind of played out like a screenplay and almost seems to have ended happily, doesn't it? What's your reaction to what's happened?
Well, I mean, I think that, this was a very, Canada's offering of asylum for Rahaf Al-Qunun was a very sort of smart political move on Canada's part, especially, following the Canadian-Saudi spat that sort of climaxed last August when Saudi Arabia cut relations with Canada for calling on Saudi Arabia to release dissidents and activists. But Canada can now say, look, we really mean it when we say that we have a feminist, human rights-oriented foreign policy. But wouldn't it be great if Canada then institutionalized this kind of feminist so-called human rights policy and applied it to other women who also, suffer from domestic abuse, sexual harassment, who suffer from war, and protect, for instance, those Yemeni women, millions of them, who continue to, starve, be killed, get amputated in a war that Canada has implicitly supported through its continued arms sales to Saudi Arabia.
Right, so it's certainly a good PR move. Let's get the view from Canada now, Bessma, Momani. What's been the reaction to the news over there? How's been it unfolding over there?
It's been very positive. I think you've seen an outpouring of public support for Rahaf's case here in Canada. It's certainly, as Noha said, been a very good, frankly, PR move for the Trudeau government. It allows it to say that it's now finally walking the walk of being a feminist foreign, having a feminist foreign policy agenda. Certainly, I agree with Noha's criticism of the Trudeau government as well. But the challenge, I think, for Canada and for, frankly, many countries is that we're dealing with a rise of nationalists and populists out there that make it very difficult for countries like Canada to have this normative, human rights-centric type of foreign policy. And so, I mean, kudos to the Canadians for doing this. This is playing very well here at home, and I would say it's probably getting Canada the kind of attention it wants, seeing it as a defender of human rights. But indeed, I think there's so much room to grow, and frankly, the world is just riddled with so much, I think, atrocities and human rights violations that, frankly, Canada is just one small drop in the pond.
Right. Well, national politics is, of course, one thing, individual rights quite another. Omaima, you just wonder how bad things have to be for somebody to have to flee their family. It's something that you did back in 2013. Tell us more about what goes on in Saudi Arabia that leads to this kind of thing.
It is very important to remind the people that women in Saudi Arabia, when they escape an abuse, they're not only escaping an abusive father, they're also escaping a tribal society where women can be, subjected to honor killing. They're also escaping the government that also imprison women who escape from an abusive husband or father. And this circle of abuse in Saudi, when a woman escapes the house, she gets imprisoned, and she can only leave the prison if the male guardian himself comes and pick her up and she returns to the abusive relationship again, to the abusive father again. It's just endless circle. So women really have no choice but to flee the country. The Saudi government made a statement earlier about the case saying this is a family affair. This is really not just a family affair. This is an institutional discrimination against women. Women in Saudi are not only fleeing from their families, they're also fleeing from a government that is not offering protection.
Is it possible to put a figure, a percentage on the number of women who are dissatisfied with the way things are in Saudi? There are those who are happy to live there under the way the regime is?
The happy women who are absolutely satisfied with the male guardianship are women who are privileged. They're from an upper class, open-minded family who, were educated abroad, had the opportunity to have an education in a different country, travel around with, an absolute freedom. But those are really do not represent the majority. The majority, the average class, let's say, or the public, do not have this privilege. Women who belong to an average family do not have the same opportunities that a woman born with an upper class or a royal family who is educated abroad. And they do not have the same rights. So the male guardianship system is really mostly affecting the average Saudi woman, not the upper class woman. And that's why in the media, after Rahaf flee the country, we see a lot of women who are obviously coming from a very privileged background criticizing her. So it is not new. Again, the majority of even wearing the abaya and forcing women to follow the strict Sharia laws, this kind of laws are really not enforced on upper class families in Saudi Arabia. They're only enforced on average families. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Omaima. Noha, one wonders how this is going down in Saudi itself and what the reaction, it may have been a PR triumph for Canada, but certainly not for Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Omaima said, from the Saudi side, it's, the argument is this is a family affair. It should have been resolved internally. I think you will find not just in Saudi Arabia, but in other Muslim countries, you'll find some reactions of, saying, well, perhaps Rahaf should have approached the family courts rather than export this kind of very internal domestic matter to the West. And so, I think that this is another sort of addition to this long list of ongoing tensions between Canada and Saudi Arabia, and of course, the increased criticism of from the international community towards Saudi Arabia. But I think that largely we'll see that the argument is this is very much an internal affair, but it's also extremely sensitive, right? Because as far as I understand, Rahaf renounced her Islamic faith. And so this could also be, the argument from the Saudi perspective, and certainly from other Muslim countries, would probably be, Canada is interfering in our Sharia law, in our religion.
And remind us what the law is about that.
You're not allowed to renounce your Islamic faith. Basically, it's prohibited.
Right, it's prohibited. So, Bessma, if I could bring you in, what do you think this could lead to? You've seen plenty of commentary online about how this is just the tip of the iceberg, and we've alluded to that so far. But could it lead to more women trying to leave the country? Is it going to lead to a clampdown within the country on women?
I think all of the above. But remember here, Canada, of course, accepted Rahaf's case because she was seen to be legitimately facing domestic violence. It's not because of her gender that she was allowed in. It's because she was facing domestic violence. And of course, in the case of Saudi Arabia, when your abuser is also your guardian, you are in, frankly, a legal trap. It's very difficult then for a woman to proceed. So it's a double whammy for many women inside the country. In terms of what this will mean for other women, I don't, remember, Rahaf is not the first to attempt to leave the country, and I don't think she'll be the last. The question will be whether or not there will be others who will try to, frankly, follow her path and be energized by Rahaf's success. I think that's the case. But remember here, women will have to leave, frankly, Saudi Arabia to get on a plane, as did Rahaf by going to Kuwait and then boarding a plane to drive to Australia. So I think this is going to be very difficult. And indeed, I think the clampdown may come from the families themselves, from abusive families or others who feel that their daughters may indeed want to leave the country. They may be more fearful about taking a vacation outside of Saudi Arabia. So indeed, I think there's going to be many knock-on effects from this move.
Omaima, you left the country, you fled the country. What happened after you got out? Did you get a lot of support from within?
No, not really. But, strangely, after I left the country and I announced that I became a refugee, I have received enormous emails and messages from Saudi women who were trying to escape the country, some who made it successfully halfway through in Dubai and got caught, or in other Arabian countries. I spoke also with other Saudi women who fled the country and they're residing in Australia, some of them in the UK and in Germany. It is really not a new phenomenon. It's been happening for quite a while. And the only difference is that those women have always done it secretly. They've never really used the media. There was never a publicity of their escape as much as it happened with the case of Rahaf. But it has been happening, for quite a while. And I've spoken with so many women who escaped the country for the exact same reasons, domestic, violence.
No, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I think just listening to Omaima speak there about, the numbers of Saudi women who have fled for their protection. I mean, while it's obviously a good thing that, they are protected and no longer facing literally a a danger to their lives. I think that this is also bad news in a way for Saudi women who don't want to leave the country, who want to be protected in their own country.
Right.
And then, of course, we could sort of elaborate on this and talk about how women's rights activists in Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region are criticized for being too Western, right? And so this whole narrative about women's rights is a Western thing, where and so this is bad news for those women who want to pursue this struggle for women's rights in their own country. The other thing I wanted to add is Rahaf's case is an individual case, and she's also, I mean, of course, she has, as we know, she has suffered, unspeakable abuse and so on in her family and in her country. But she was fortunate enough to be able to escape, if I can say.
Right. She had a phone. She could afford a plane ticket. And...
She was fortunate enough to know about Twitter. She was fortunate enough to tweet and have those tweets in English.
And she was on holiday in Kuwait.
And she was on holiday in Kuwait. Millions, literally millions of women don't have those privileges, if that's what we can call them, and yet they are also suffering multiple forms of oppression. And so going back to my earlier point, I think it's high time for Canada to really show how serious it is about institutionalizing, sort of introducing more programs to help protect women from other parts of the world.
Right. Bessma, within Saudi itself, we've seen some reforms from the Crown Prince, but that list that I read out at the start of the show, it goes to show that there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Absolutely. And I think, it's important to point out that life for the average woman in Saudi Arabia is getting better, relatively speaking. And there have been reforms, and I think we need to sort of commend those reforms. But the challenge is that it's just not at the pace fast enough for where Saudi women want to be and where Saudi women deserve. I mean, I appreciate Omaima's point about, this is not the case for all Saudi women, and certainly there's a class dimension. But let's not forget here, Saudi Arabian women are increasingly very educated. They're becoming far more, I think, hyper-connected to the world. They do travel, many of them do travel. And so, this is just not in keeping with, a modern 21st century society. And Saudi women know that. And I think that this has become, an important issue for the Saudi government to finally recognize that if it wants to achieve the dreams it has of the so-called Vision 2030 and other ambitious, social economic reforms, it needs to start recognizing that it needs to allow women to be full citizens before the law 100%. And that's not the case under these guardianship laws. And I would want to add that, in this ambitious 2030 vision plan, it's about creating an innovative, creative society. And if you want to do that, you need to start recognizing that women are a part of that. You cannot have a society that is advancing, that is progressing, that simply is just not out there in terms of countries that are able to make all the high indicators of success, be it economic, social, and otherwise, without the full equality of women. And so this is, I think, a national imperative, and I hope that the Saudi government takes from this is not another bad PR move, or that somehow this is just another stain on its reputation that time needs to just heal, but instead say, look, this is about high time for us to do something about this domestically. I'm very encouraged by the fact that not just women, but men in Saudi Arabia want this change. This is not working for a modern family, for a modern man and woman, a modern family. It's just not the case. And so I think there's just room for change here in Saudi Arabia that I hope that the government finally takes up on.
And Omaima, is that something that you think is likely to happen the way things are going?
Well, looking into the history of Saudi Arabia, they've always introduced a change in a gradual way. Back in the 60s, when the Saudi government finally allowed women to go to schools and pursue education, a lot of the religious groups protested in Saudi Arabia against that. So I believe, especially after what happened also in the 80s, Jayman story, I think the Saudi Arabian government do want to make a change in the society. They do want to open up a little bit and give women freedom, but they're also afraid of the reaction of the religious sects. They're afraid that they might create another Jayman-like movement. They might create some sort of religious revolutionary movement that, a lot of religious people would be very upset if women became very dependent, especially in a society like Saudi Arabia, very tribal, very conservative, especially in the central part. In places like the Eastern Province and the Western Province, Eastern Saudi women and women who live in the western part of Saudi Arabia, they have a, let's say, more open society, and they have a lot more privileges than women who live in Riyadh or who live in Qasim, for example. I think it might happen, but maybe this case of Rahaf might have shaken up the Saudi government a little bit. But I don't see that things will change right away. They're probably going to be, again, slow change, just like the, lifting the ban on driving.
Noha, is this a change that has got to solely come from within, or what role does the international community have?
Well, I think we've seen the role of the international community with the case of Rahaf. She drew attention from the UN, and the UNHCR stepped in. And this was actually quite an easy case for the UN. It was an individual case. It wasn't millions of political asylum seekers. And Canada very willingly accepted Rahaf's case. I think that the international community needs to push governments even more than they already have been pushing to standardize or sort of institutionalize again this human rights oriented policy, but in particular to draw attention to those women and men who don't get near as much attention as the Syrians, for example, or the Saudis. I mean, I think Saudi Arabia right now is, it's the state that everyone is talking about because of everything that has happened in the last few years. But it's really important to remember that there are so many other women in Rahaf's situation and worse, who are not getting anywhere as near enough attention as she has. And
of course, a lot of nations have very close ties with Saudi Arabia and huge financial dealings worth billions of dollars, not least the arms trade.
I mean, I think this should also be a wake-up call for countries such as Saudi Arabia to think about, do we want our citizens to flee and continue to call us out from the West and cause us this headache, or is it better to treat them better and have them stay in the country and contribute to the country? I think this is also a wake-up call for reforming the legal system in these countries, ensuring that there is legal protection, legal redress for women and other oppressed people in those countries.
Bessma, I think you want to come in there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I think there's many issues here that need to be pointed out. I mean, one thing remember here is that the vast majority of society in Saudi Arabia is under the age of 30. And yes, there's a religious establishment and clerics who will want to push against these kinds of reforms, but they're just simply not the majority anymore. And so I think if Mohammed bin Salman is going to really, energize the base of young people as he tries to do, then he needs to recognize that this is actually going to be a popular move among young Saudis. And I think, the dinosaurs, the religious dinosaurs, just need to deal with it. They're just simply, frankly, not the future of Saudi Arabia. That's one thing. The second thing, I think, is that, the international community is at a point today where, frankly, Canada feels like a lone voice talking about human rights. I mean, we're talking about the Twitter or the tweet that our foreign minister pointed out last summer that caused us to be frankly ostracized by the international community, including many Western countries who, profess to have this, liberal human rights agenda. They were absolutely silent and quiet when it came to Canada's kerfuffle with the Saudis. And I think it's because of the economic weight that Saudi Arabia has. Saudi Arabia is still the largest and biggest importer of weapons in the world. That means that, of course, that's big business. And so there is this cowing to Saudi pressure because of the economic stakes at play here. But I think, Canada took a very brave move. It may cost us some financial relations with the Saudis, but I would say that most Canadians are frankly quite willing to pay those costs to be on the right side of history. And I can't say that's the case for many countries around the world.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. We've run out of time, but great to get your perspectives on this important story. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you to our guests, Noha Abou-el-dahab here in the studio, Bessma, Momani, and Omaima Al Najjar. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can also take the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the whole team here, bye for now.